The living room felt smaller than usual when my parents called the family meeting. I sat on the couch, my sister Violet across from me, looking smug in a way I couldn't quite place yet. My father cleared his throat, the sound echoing off the walls like a warning shot I didn't know to dodge. My mother folded her hands in her lap, her wedding ring catching the afternoon light. They looked at each other, then at me, and I felt my stomach drop before anyone said a word. "We've made a decision about your college fund," my father said. The words hung in the air, heavy and wrong. I leaned forward, waiting for the rest. Waiting for the part where they told me which school they thought I should choose, or maybe some financial advice about budgeting. Instead, my mother smiled that tight, rehearsed smile she used when she was about to say something she knew would hurt. "We're giving it to Violet." The room tilted. My ears rang. I looked at Violet, expecting shock, confusion, anything human. She was grinning. "It's for the best," my mother continued, her voice smooth like she was explaining why we couldn't have dessert before dinner. "Violet's degree has real career potential. Marketing opens doors. Your art program is just impractical." Impractical. The word landed like a slap. I'd spent 3 years in advanced art courses, winning regional competitions, building a portfolio that teachers called exceptional. I'd already been accepted to one of the top programs in the state. And they were calling it impractical. My father nodded along. "We need to invest wisely. This isn't personal, it's logical." Violet stood up and walked over to me. She put her hand on my shoulder, squeezing just hard enough to remind me she was older, bigger, more important. She leaned down, her voice dropping to a whisper only I could hear. "You should be grateful I'm even explaining this to you," she said. "Do you know how much you owe this family? All those art supplies, those classes, those competitions? Someone had to pay for that." Her words sounded practiced. Memorized. Like she'd been waiting to deliver them. I sat frozen, watching my parents exchange satisfied looks. This wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. Choreographed. They'd decided weeks ago, maybe months, and waited until now to tell me. The fund had been set up by my grandmother before she died. I remembered her taking me aside when I was 12, telling me she believed in me, that this money would help me chase my dreams. "She wanted me to have this," I said quietly. My father's jaw tightened. "She wanted the family to be taken care of. We're the ones who decide how that happens." My mother reached across the coffee table, touching my knee. "You'll understand one day. When you're older, when you see how the world really works, you'll thank us for teaching you to be independent." Independent. They were taking everything and calling it a gift. I looked at Violet again. She was scrolling through her phone now, already bored with my reaction. She'd gotten what she wanted. My pain was just background noise. That night, I heard them through the walls of my bedroom. "She'll fall in line once reality hits," my father said. Their voices drifted through the heating vent, clear as if they were standing in my room. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to them discuss me like I was a problem to be managed rather than a daughter to be loved. "She's always been dramatic," my mother replied. "Give her a week. She'll apologize and ask how she can help Violet succeed." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. They weren't worried about me. They were annoyed I hadn't clapped for them. I pulled my pillow over my face and let the anger build in my chest, hot and clarifying. The next morning, my phone buzzed with notifications. Violet had posted photos on social media. Pictures of acceptance letters, screenshots of tuition payments being processed, captions about family support and dreams coming true. In one photo, she was holding a coffee cup with "Future CEO" printed on it. The comments poured in. "So proud of you. Your parents raised you right. You deserve this. No one mentioned me. My uncle called that afternoon. His voice was careful, like he was talking to someone fragile. I heard about the college fund situation, he said. Maybe you should just apologize. Keep the peace. Your parents know what's best. I thanked him and hung up. 3 more relatives called over the next 2 days. All of them said the same thing. Be patient. Be grateful. Don't make waves. It was easier to tell me to shrink than to tell my parents they were wrong. I stopped answering the phone. I stopped checking social media. I moved through the house like a ghost, and my family barely noticed. Violet talked endlessly about her upcoming semester. My parents listened with the kind of attention they'd never given me. I became invisible in my own home. Then, on a Tuesday night, an email appeared in my inbox. The subject line read, "Invitation to the annual Scholars Recognition Ceremony." I opened it, my hands shaking slightly. The message was formal, congratulatory. They wanted to honor my independence and resilience in pursuing academic excellence despite significant obstacles. I read the email 3 times, my heart pounding. The ceremony was in 6 weeks. It was public, hosted by the state's largest education foundation. There would be speeches, awards, media coverage. And at the bottom of the email, I saw something that made me sit up straighter. A list of attendees. Donors, families, community leaders. And there, highlighted in bold, were my parents' names. I didn't understand at first. Why would they be invited? Then I remembered. Years ago, when my grandmother first set up the fund, my parents had submitted paperwork to a donor recognition program. They'd signed forms, provided documentation, all in my name. The foundation thought they were supportive parents. They had no idea what had happened in our living room 2 weeks ago. The email said I was expected to give a brief speech. Nothing too long. Just a few words about my journey, my gratitude, my future. They sent a sample script, warm and grateful, thanking everyone who had helped me get here. I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't tell my parents about the email. I didn't tell anyone. I moved through the next few weeks in silence, watching as my family relaxed around me. They thought I'd given up. My mother stopped asking if I was okay. My father stopped making comments about reality checks. Violet started treating me like a servant, asking me to help her pack, to drive her places, to celebrate her good fortune. I said yes to everything. I smiled. I nodded. I played the role they wanted me to play. And while they celebrated, I started gathering documents. Quietly. Carefully. I found the original fund paperwork in my father's filing cabinet. I took photos of every page. I searched my email for old messages from my grandmother, conversations where she explicitly said the money was for me and only me. I found bank statements showing the fund's growth over the years, the account labeled with my name and social security number. I found everything. And I realized something that made my blood run cold. My parents hadn't just reallocated the fund. They'd misrepresented it. The legal documents were clear. The money was mine. It was set up in a restricted educational trust with my grandmother as the grantor and me as the sole beneficiary. My parents were listed as trustees, which meant they were supposed to manage it for my benefit, not redirect it to someone else. I showed the documents to my friend's older brother, who was in law school. He looked through everything, his expression growing more serious with each page. "This isn't legal," he said finally. "They can't just give your trust fund to your sister. That's a breach of fiduciary duty. If this went to court, they'd have to return every cent, probably with penalties." I thanked him and went home. That night, I lay in bed and thought about what I could do. I could hire a lawyer. I could fight them privately. I could make this a quiet family battle. Or I could let the truth come out the way it was already headed. Publicly. At the ceremony. The choice felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. Invitations for the ceremony went out to everyone on the foundation's mailing list. My parents received theirs in the mail, an elegant cream envelope with gold lettering. I watched my mother open it at breakfast. Her eyes lit up as she read. "We've been invited to a donor recognition ceremony," she announced. "They're honoring families who've supported education in the community." My father beamed. "That's wonderful. We should get new outfits. This is a big deal." Violet immediately pulled out her phone, already planning her dress, her makeup, her photos. She started a group chat with her friends, bragging about the event, about how her parents were being recognized for their generosity. No one asked why I was quiet. No one wondered if I'd been invited too. Over the next week, they told everyone. Relatives, neighbors, co-workers. My parents described themselves as dedicated supporters of education, as people who believed in investing in the future. They rewrote history in real time, and everyone believed them. The ceremony was 2 weeks away. The foundation sent me the final version of my speaking script. It was short, maybe 3 minutes long. It thanked my parents for honoring their original commitment to my education. It praised their sacrifice and vision. It painted them as heroes. I read it sitting in my car after school, my hands tight on the steering wheel. The words felt like lies on the page, and I was supposed to say them out loud, in front of hundreds of people, while my parents smiled and accepted applause for something they'd stolen. At the bottom of the email was a note from the coordinator. "If you'd like to make any changes to the script, please let us know. We want this to feel authentic to your experience." I stared at that sentence for a long time. They were giving me permission to tell the truth. Not demanding it. Not forcing it. Just offering me the space to decide who I wanted to be in this moment. That night, I started rewriting. Not with anger. Not with cruelty. Just with facts. With dates and documents and the plain, simple truth. I thought about protecting them. I really did. I imagined standing at that podium, reading the script they expected, letting them have their moment of glory. It would be easier. It would keep the peace. It would make me the good daughter they'd always wanted me to pretend to be. Then I remembered every time they dismissed my dreams. Every time they'd compared me to Violet and found me lacking. Every time they'd smiled while taking something that was mine and calling it love. I remembered my grandmother's hands on my shoulders, her voice steady and sure. "You're going to do amazing things. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She'd given me that money because she believed in me. And my parents had taken it because they didn't. I saved the new speech on my laptop. I didn't show anyone. I didn't practice out loud. I just let the words exist, waiting for the moment they'd be needed. The ceremony was in 4 days. My parents bought new clothes. Violet got her hair done professionally. They laughed and took pictures and never once asked how I felt. The morning of the ceremony, the house buzzed with excitement. My mother checked her makeup 3 times. My father adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror. Violet recorded everything, narrating like she was documenting a historical event. "Today, my family gets recognized for changing lives," she said into her phone, her voice bright and performative. "I'm so lucky to have parents who believe in education." I got dressed in my room, hands steady as I buttoned my shirt. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. Somewhere in the last few weeks, I'd stopped being the daughter who begged for crumbs of affection. I'd become someone who knew her worth, even if her family didn't. We drove to the venue in silence. Well, they talked. I just stared out the window, watching the city blur past. The event hall was massive, all glass and marble, with banners hanging from the ceiling. People filled the lobby, dressed in formal clothes, holding programs, chatting in clusters. My parents were immediately swarmed by people they knew. They shook hands, accepted congratulations, basked in attention. Violet posed for photos, her smile wide and perfect. I stood to the side, invisible again. Then someone called my name. A woman in a foundation badge approached me, her smile warm and genuine. "You must be so proud," she said. "Your parents have done so much to support your education. We're honored to recognize families like yours." I nodded, my throat tight. "Thank you." She led me backstage, explaining the program, the timing, the order of speakers. My name was third on the list. I'd speak after the foundation director and another student. Then my parents would be called forward for recognition. "Just read from the podium screen," she said. "Everything's loaded up for you. You'll do great." I thanked her and found a quiet corner to wait. My heart pounded, but my hands stayed still. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. The ceremony began with music, applause, the foundation director welcoming everyone. He spoke about the power of education, the importance of family support, the bright futures being built in that very room. People clapped. I heard my mother's voice rise above the others, enthusiastic and proud. Then it was my turn. They called my name. I stood, smoothed my clothes, and walked toward the stage. The lights were bright, hot against my skin. I could see my parents in the third row, smiling, already preparing to stand when their moment came. I reached the podium and looked out at the crowd. I started the way they expected. Warm. Grateful. Composed. "Thank you all for being here today. This is an incredible honor, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share my story." Heads nodded. My parents relaxed into their seats. Violet held up her phone, recording. "When I was 12, I continued, my grandmother set up a college fund for me. She told me it was because she believed in my dreams. She said it would help me build the future I wanted." The room was still, attentive. I saw the foundation director lean forward slightly, interested. "That fund was promised to me. It was set up legally in my name, meant to support my education in the arts, a field I've worked in for years." I paused. Just for a second. Just long enough to let the next sentence land with full weight. 3 weeks ago, my parents told me they were giving that fund to my sister instead. The air shifted. Murmurs rippled through the audience like a wave. I saw my mother's smile freeze. My father's face went pale. Violet lowered her phone slowly, her expression confused, then horrified. I didn't stop. "They told me my dreams were impractical," I said, my voice steady. "That my sister's future was a better investment. The fund my grandmother created specifically for me was reassigned without my consent, without legal authority, and without any regard for her wishes." I pulled out a folded paper from my pocket and held it up. "This is a copy of the original trust document. It lists me as the sole beneficiary. The money couldn't be legally transferred to anyone else. It was mine by law, by intention, and by the love of a grandmother who wanted me to succeed." The foundation director stood up, his face serious. He walked toward the side of the stage, speaking quietly to an assistant. The room buzzed with noise now, people whispering, turning to look at my parents. I looked directly at them. "I'm not here to ask for pity. I'm here because the foundation invited me to speak about my journey. And my journey has been about learning to stand up for myself when the people who were supposed to protect me chose not to." My mother's hand covered her mouth. My father stared at the floor. Violet had stopped recording. Her face was red, her eyes wide. "So I want to thank my parents," I said, my voice calm and clear. "For teaching me self-reliance. For showing me that I can't depend on people who see me as an obstacle to someone else's success. And for proving that sometimes, the family you're born into isn't the family you deserve. The applause didn't come. The room was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like everyone's holding their breath at once. I stepped back from the podium, my legs shaky but functional. The foundation director was still talking to his team, his expression grave. I walked off stage and into the wings, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. I'd done it. I'd told the truth. And I couldn't take it back. A few moments later, the director returned to the microphone. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption. We're looking into the situation that was just described. Our foundation takes these matters very seriously. He glanced at his notes, then looked out at the audience. According to the documentation we have on file, the trust fund in question was indeed established with a single named beneficiary. We were not aware of any changes or complications regarding its distribution. People shifted in their seats. My parents sat frozen, like statues in the third row. Violet had disappeared. I didn't know where she'd gone. The director's voice was firm now. We'll be pausing the family recognition portion of today's ceremony until we can verify the details. We appreciate your understanding. And just like that, everything changed. My father tried to stand up, his hand raised like he was asking permission to speak. One of the foundation's staff members approached him, speaking quietly but urgently. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see his face. He looked panicked, defensive, trapped. The director gestured to someone off stage, and another person appeared, holding a folder. They exchanged words, flipping through papers, checking something against a list. Then the director nodded and returned to the microphone. After consulting with our records, I can confirm that the original trust documents list only one beneficiary for the fund we were recognizing today. Any reallocation of those funds without proper legal process would be a serious matter, one that falls outside the scope of this ceremony. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. We'll be following up privately with the family in question. For now, we'll move forward with the rest of today's program. The staff member approached my parents again. This time, my father's face went from pale to red. He started to argue, his voice rising enough that people nearby turned to look. My mother grabbed his arm, pulling him back down into his seat. They sat there, shrinking under the weight of hundreds of eyes. No one clapped for them. No one smiled. They'd been erased. The ceremony continued, but the energy had changed. People whispered through the next speech. Cameras turned toward my parents instead of the stage. I stayed in the wings, watching through a gap in the curtain, my hands clutching the edge of the fabric. When the director announced that the foundation would be offering me direct scholarship support to replace the fund that had been mismanaged, the applause finally came. It was loud, genuine, overwhelming. I stepped back onto the stage, my eyes stinging with tears I refused to let fall. The director shook my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. You have a future here, he said quietly, just for me. We'll make sure of it. I thanked him, my voice barely audible over the noise. When I looked back out at the audience, my parents were gone. Their seats were empty, two dark gaps in a row of faces. Violet was still missing. They'd left without a word. People came up to me afterward, shaking my hand, offering support. Some of them were crying. Others looked angry, not at me, but for me. I accepted their words with a numb sort of gratitude, still not quite believing what had just happened. An older woman touched my shoulder. You're braver than most adults I know, she said. Don't ever let anyone take that from you. I stood in the lobby long after most people had left. A few reporters lingered, asking questions I politely declined to answer. The foundation staff assured me they'd handle everything, that I didn't need to worry about the legal side of things. They had resources, lawyers, processes designed exactly for situations like this. We'll be initiating a full review of the trust, the director told me. If what you've described is accurate, and we believe it is, your parents will be required to return the funds in full. There may be additional penalties. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. This was real. This was happening. After years of being told I didn't matter, someone finally believed me. Someone was finally on my side. I drove home alone. My parents' car wasn't in the driveway when I arrived. Neither was Violet's. The house was dark, empty, silent in a way that felt different from before. This wasn't the silence of being ignored. This was the silence of absence. I went to my room and sat on the bed. My phone buzzed with messages. Friends from school, relatives I hadn't heard from in years, people who'd seen clips from the ceremony already circulating online. Some were supportive. Others were angry, accusing me of humiliating my family. I didn't respond to any of them. The front door opened around midnight. I heard footsteps, harsh whispers, the sound of something being dropped heavily on the floor. I stayed in my room, my door locked, listening as my parents and Violet moved through the house like wounded animals. How could she do this to us? Violet's voice was shrill, angry. She made us look like criminals. She embarrassed us, my father said. In front of everyone. In front of the whole community. My mother's voice was quieter, but no less bitter. We gave her everything. And this is how she repays us. They didn't talk about the fund. They didn't talk about what they'd done. They only talked about how they'd been wronged, how I'd betrayed them, how their reputation was destroyed. Even now, even after everything, they couldn't see past their own reflection. I heard Violet storm up the stairs, her door slamming so hard the walls shook. My parents stayed downstairs for a long time, their voices rising and falling, discussing lawyers and damage control and how to spin the story. No one knocked on my door. No one apologized. No one even acknowledged I was there. The next morning, I woke up to find the house empty again. A note on the kitchen counter said they'd gone to stay with relatives for a few days. It didn't say when they'd be back. It didn't ask how I was. It was just information, cold and distant. The story spread faster than I expected. Someone had recorded parts of the ceremony. The video appeared on local news sites, then social media, then national platforms. People shared it with captions about justice, about standing up to family, about the courage it takes to tell the truth when the cost is so high. Comments piled up. Thousands of them. Some people called me brave. Others called me cruel. A few said I should have handled it privately, that I'd destroyed my family for attention. I didn't read most of them. I couldn't. 3 days after the ceremony, my mother came home. She found me in the kitchen, making tea, trying to pretend my hands weren't shaking. She stood in the doorway, her face puffy and red, her eyes raw from crying. "You've ruined us," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. "Do you understand that? People are calling us thieves. Your father might lose clients. Violet's scholarships are being questioned. All because you couldn't keep quiet." I turned to face her, the mug warm in my hands. "I didn't ruin you," I said quietly. "I just stopped protecting you." She stared at me like I'd spoken a language she didn't understand. "We're your parents. You owe us respect. You owe us loyalty." "I owed you honesty," I replied. "And you couldn't give me that." She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. For the first time in my life, she had nothing to say. "Everyone makes mistakes," she finally whispered. "We were trying to do what was best for the family." "No," I said. "You were trying to do what was easiest." And when I didn't go along with it, you expected me to disappear. She took a step closer, her hand reaching out like she might touch my arm. I stepped back. The space between us felt like miles. I'm your mother, she said. Doesn't that mean anything to you? I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone I didn't recognize anymore. Or maybe I'd never really known her at all. It meant everything, I said. Until you chose Violet over me. Until you took something that wasn't yours and called it fair. Until you stood in front of everyone and lied about who you are. We didn't lie. You've been lying my whole life. To me. To yourselves. To everyone who thought you were good parents. Her face crumpled. She turned and walked out of the kitchen, her footsteps heavy and uneven. I heard her go upstairs, heard a door close. Then silence. Always silence. I finished my tea and went back to my room. My phone was still exploding with notifications. Messages from the foundation, from journalists, from strangers. One caught my eye. It was from Violet. The text was short. Blunt. Almost clinical. I knew. I knew it was your money. I thought you'd get over it. I stared at the screen, reading the words over and over. She knew. The whole time, through every smile and every hug and every social media post, she knew she was taking something that didn't belong to her. And she did it anyway because she thought I was weak enough to accept it. I didn't respond. I just blocked her number, her social media, every avenue she had to reach me. The satisfaction was quiet but absolute. She didn't deserve my anger. She didn't deserve my words. She deserved exactly what I'd given her. Nothing. Over the next week, the foundation reached out multiple times. They'd completed their review. The trust was being restored in full. My parents were being removed as trustees. A neutral third party would manage the funds until I turned 25, at which point full control would transfer to me. Additionally, the foundation was offering me a separate scholarship to cover any gaps. I'd have enough. More than enough. I could go to the school I wanted, study what I loved, build the future my grandmother had envisioned for me. I could do it all without them. The relief was overwhelming. I sat in my car in an empty parking lot and cried for the first time since the ceremony. Not sad tears. Not angry tears. Just release. 2 weeks later, I moved out. I packed everything I owned into boxes and bags, loading them into my car in trips that took most of a Saturday. My parents didn't help. They barely spoke to me. Violet stayed in her room the entire time. When I carried the last box down the stairs, my father was standing in the entryway. He looked older than I remembered, his shoulders slumped, his face lined with exhaustion. "You're really leaving," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am. You didn't have to do this. We could have worked it out as a family." I set the box down. "We stopped being a family when you chose her over me. When you lied to me. When you expected me to thank you for it." He shook his head. "You're making a mistake. You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said. "But it'll be my mistake. My choice. My life." I picked up the box and walked past him, out the door, into the afternoon light. I didn't look back. I didn't say goodbye. I just left, and with every step, I felt lighter. My new apartment was small, barely furnished, but it was mine. I unpacked slowly, finding places for everything, building a space that felt safe. That night, I sat on the floor with takeout and silence and realized I wasn't afraid anymore. The first day of classes felt like stepping into a new world. I walked through the campus, surrounded by people who didn't know my story, who saw me as just another student. I sat in a lecture hall, notebook open, listening to a professor talk about color theory and artistic vision. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like myself. Not the overlooked daughter. Not the sister who didn't measure up. Just me. Whole and unafraid. My phone buzzed during lunch. A message from an unknown number. I almost deleted it without reading, but something made me open it. It was from my grandmother's lawyer. He'd been handling the trust review and wanted me to know that everything was finalized. The money was secure. My future was secure. Your grandmother would be proud, he wrote. I sat there, in the sun, on a bench under trees that were just starting to turn gold, and I let myself believe it. She would be proud. Not because I'd fought back or because I'd won. But because I'd survived. Because I'd chosen myself when no one else would. That evening, I stood in my apartment and looked at the life I was building. Small, quiet, mine. They'd tried to take my future. Instead, they lost me. And I gained everything that mattered.